All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you, judges, and thank you to our other participants. It's been really cool hearing about the other ideas and seeing where we overlap. My name is Dorian Clay, and this is Jessica Wen.
All right. So I want you to try a little experiment with us. Sarah, can you count 3 seconds out loud?
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, that's it. That's all AI needs to create like an 85% accurate voice clone of you. And in 2024, AI-based voice phishing increased more than 400%. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center logged $893 million in losses in 2025. And that is an underestimate, according to the Bureau itself. But the real gut punch is the success rate. Of the people targeted with an AI voice scam, 77% of them lose money, and 43% of those victims lost between $500 to $15,000. So the core dilemma we face here is accountability. When a consumer gets scammed, the immediate fraudster, the person or group of people orchestrating the voice clone, is almost always anonymous and/or based overseas, which puts them beyond the ability of US authorities to track them down. And you, as an individual consumer, certainly can't sue a ghost. The intermediate AI platforms have historically refused accountability, which leaves us with 2 huge questions. How do we get this money back to victims? And how do we prevent scammers from using AI tools for fraud as much as possible? So here, we propose 3 policy frameworks in an attempt to answer these questions. So the 3 accountability and compensation frameworks that we cover are strict vicarious liability, a negligence-based duty of care, and an AI fraud victim compensation fund. These approaches are all backed by various precedents and have a history of successful consumer compensation. So we'll start with the strict vicarious liability model. This is based on the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or the TCPA. The mechanism involves amending the TCPA or introducing parallel legislation to impose strict liability on AI platforms for fraud committed using their tools. This is based on 3 agency principles. So that's actual authority, apparent authority, and ratification. What matters the most here is ratification, which is when the platform learns that an agent has acted even without prior authorization and chooses to accept the benefits of that action rather than repudiate it. Next, yes. So ratification is the most important for AI platform liability, since you don't have to have authorized the conduct up front, but liability attaches because you knew about it after the fact and did nothing meaningful to stop it whilst continuing to profit. So that's what the Krakauer versus Dish network case turned on. Cool. Yeah, next one. Yeah, perfect. So trade-offs are that the strict liability may chill legitimate AI development. And we'll cover some things later to mitigate this. But then the other issue is that post Loper Bright, the Loper Bright case, the Supreme Court overruled the Chevron doctrine, where agencies were able to interpret sort of ambiguous statutes, and now the courts decide instead. So I guess agencies such as the FTC are less able to decide how to interpret these kind of laws. Okay, so now we come to the negligence-based duty of care. This tackles some of the strict liability issues. So basically, it expands the FTC Section 5 to apply to AI platforms, where AI platforms fail to implement reasonable safeguards against foreseeable fraud. So these safeguards could include cryptographic signatures, know your customer, etc. The exact safeguards could be instituted and listed by NIST, so it's not necessarily something that we need to delve too deeply into, but there are potential ways to approach this. And these safeguards should be approved by third-party auditing, sort of leaning into the thing that you mentioned about auditing ecosystems and providing incentives for that. So the FTC versus Wyndham case proved that having inadequate data security constituted unfair practice, even in the absence of specific regulations for this. So basically, they instituted something called a knew/should have known about it. Yeah, and I'll skip ahead to the issues. So specifically, AMG Capital Management versus FTC was where the Supreme Court stripped the FTC's ability to seek restitution. So this basically requires that means that the FTC cannot seek restitution, but instead must basically go through some drawn-out process to get the money back.
All right, and the third layer of our cake here is the AI Fraud Victim Compensation Fund. This sounds a lot like what some of our other participants have proposed, so I'm going to kind of move through this pretty quickly to get to how we're seeing all of these three come together. And the one thing to touch on here before getting there is this open source problem. So like mentioned, if there's models developed by open source developers and then hosted by platforms, the question is, how do we attribute liability in this case? And we think that it is the best approach to target the hosting platform itself. The platform is the one who financially benefits from this hosting, and the people that are releasing open source models are not necessarily doing it specifically to financially benefit. That's why it's open source and not closed source. So as you can see here, the diagram demonstrates that the open source developer has a relationship with the hosting layer, and the fraudster has the relationship with that hosting layer as well. The fraud is mediated through a hosting layer. And even though the hosting layer then is carrying this burden, they are the ones that get the financial incentive. And then that takes us to our layer cake. So we imagine that these three approaches are necessary together because any one approach is not sufficient. And in particular, in this current climate, it is really hard to get people on board with everything, so pursuing multiple routes at the same time is the best option. All right, so yes, our combined framework then has the FTC doing rulemaking and the Senate Commerce Committee writing the legislation that will allow us to do the AI Victim Fund. All right, thank you. Sorry for stepping on the gas there at the end.
So I want to make sure I have the phishing model correct here. So grandma, is she paying money to somebody, or is she giving out information from which someone can get money? For example, giving out bank account numbers or something like that.
So often the grandma scheme involves the grandma giving money, yes. And she receives a call from that spoofed of like her grandson, yeah. Correct, yes.
I think I was least clear on what constitutes an unfair practice here, and like what the connection between like manipulative unfair practices under Section 5, the connection between that and the context here. If you guys could explain that a bit more.
Yeah, so I think the unfair practices also involve negligence, and negligence in this case would mean like they're lacking safeguards around like preventing people from using this model for fraud, for example, or like they don't know who is using it and stuff like that.
Okay, and then what do you think reasonable safeguards look like? Which is, yeah. I won't make it a leading question.
Sure, yeah. So I kind of already mentioned like know your customer. I think there are certain like maybe degrees of scale here as well. So often automated fraud would require like thousands of tokens running and lots of use of the model, and that would require more, I guess, more safeguards would be required for that versus like sort of private use or like small scale use. So I think reasonable safeguards also would scale with like scale, I suppose. And other reasonable safeguards could be like cryptographic signatures to show that certain, I guess, users were authorized to use the model or the platform and things like that. You probably have some other ideas as well.
Yeah, I think if I were to jump in there, one thing that I would mention is that I think there already is an incentive for these platforms to track the usage, like the tokens that are going through them. A, they need to actually get reimbursed for that token usage. And B, I think the developers and the platforms they have a disincentive for their competitors to be doing things like model distillation. So we can leverage that existing tracking that's happening to be able to see if there are fraudulent uses as well.
Can you explain a little bit more on the timeline of redressability for each plaintiff? Because what I'm hearing in a lot of these proposals is time in court and time without my money.
Yes. Are you asking about the direct one or the victim
fund? How long is this going to take? Who's funding this? And if this is going to court, it takes about like 6 to 24 months to get a courtroom now.
Yes, that is one of the benefits of having that third pillar of the victim fund, where if there's no clear actor that someone can target for litigation, or if that is too much of an expense for them, they can just go through the victim fund and receive compensation through that. And we would imagine that that's the route that most individuals like a grandmother would take, but perhaps other people who have been targeted routinely might look for a specific private litigation.
Then how do you respond to the collusion problem that was discussed previously?
Yes, this is definitely a significant issue with creating an incentive for essentially being the bad actor oneself. And I think inevitably it will be in the fund's interest to try to mitigate that, just as it's in the insurance company's interest to prevent insurance fraud, or to be really careful with their cases to determine when and when it is not insurance fraud. And I imagine there will be some line at which claims under a certain amount, it's like not worth pursuing and investigating, and then larger claims are going to be further investigated. I think that's a challenge that is very difficult to address, but one that is somewhat inevitable in creating ways that individuals can also be compensated.
Yeah, and there are incentives, I think, with the fund. It could be similar to the environmental super fund, where the fund itself compensates or spends money to clean up oil spills, but then goes after the people responsible for the oil spill, or in this case for the fraud, to get that money back.
Thank you so much.